prayer and the specific people he mentioned, and also even our study tonight. In our readings, we are finishing 2 Samuel and beginning 1 Kings. This latter part of 2 Samuel is about what, in a nutshell? All of his troubles, yes, troubles within his family, and then troubles really in the kingdom. And who has been, we're just going to summarize, who has been a big obstacle to David? Absalom. And Absalom really conspires against his own father. And as time passes, what happens to Absalom? He's killed, yeah. And there's a Ahithophel. What's his relation to David? He was a what?
Thorn in his side.
A thorn in his side. Had he been a helper, a friend, an advisor maybe, counselor? Yes. And Ahithophel becomes a type of whom in the New Testament? Judas. That's right. David is a type of Christ. Ahithophel is a type of Judas. And it ends in 2 Samuel, the ending of it. David is getting older, and David decides to do something that displeased God. What was it? He counted the people. That's right. He numbered the people. And the reason was seemingly to show the significance of how they had a vast army, a vast nation. And so really the confidence would not be necessarily in God, but in the numbers and in themselves. And we find Gideon and others in the book of Judges. All right, so the people are numbered, and then God gives David 3 choices that he can have. And this is in the last chapter of 2 Samuel. What are the choices, and what does he choose? Famine. Right. And what was the third one? The plague. Right. And what did he choose, Patty? The plague. All right. And so we find that toward the end, there's a great statement here. David is here in Jerusalem, obviously, and he wants to look all the way down in verse 22. Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take and offer up what seems good to him. Behold, the oxen for the burnt offering, the threshing instruments, the yokes of oxen for the wood. All this, O king, doth Araunah give to the king." And Araunah said unto the king, "Jehovah thy God accept thee." And the king said to Araunah, "No," and David wanted to buy this spot. And he says, "No, I'll just give it to you." And David says, "No, I will verily buy it at a price, neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God, which what? Which cost me nothing." That's a tremendous phrase that we ought to. I'm not going to offer to God something that cost me nothing. In essence, where's that go? What are we thinking? What's the application here? That we ought to be willing to do what? Make a sacrifice. Yeah. The worship of God is meaningful. It's not something we just, throw together. It's meaning. I'm going to take time. I'm going to put effort, perhaps money, in whatever is done. All right. In 1 Kings, the next book, again, we're just summarizing. The first 11 chapters deal with whose reign? Who follows David? Solomon. That's right. And David's old age is mentioned. He has some who are trying to usurp the throne. Bathsheba is an advisor here to Solomon. And then in chapter 2, David gives a charge to Solomon. In verse 10 of chapter 2, David slept with his fathers, was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were how many? 40 years, 7 in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established greatly. In our study in Acts on Thursday morning, we made the point in Acts 2, and it's mentioned in other places, that Christ sat on David's throne. But Psalm 110 says that he sat at the right hand of God. The Lord said to my Lord, sit thou on my right hand. And here, Solomon sat on the throne of David, his father. But then in other cases, it's called the throne of God. Are there separate, distinct thrones, or is it one idea, one throne? It's one throne. And it's the throne of God from the point of view that God wanted to reign through these men such as David and Solomon and so on. So it's God's throne in that his will should have been carried out by the king on earth. But then it was Solomon's throne. They sat on the throne of David, his father, from the point of view that it was his literal descendant on it. And so it was a physical throne there. But, now with Jesus Christ, is it a physical throne? No. Where is it? It's in heaven. But Jesus was a physical descendant of David. So, you got the Jesus on David's throne. He's a physical descendant. But it's not on earth, it's in heaven. All right. And then in the 3rd chapter, Solomon prays for, God's asked him, where am I going with this? God asked him, you asked me what you would like, and what? I'll give it to you. And what did Solomon ask for? Wisdom. Was God pleased with that? Yes. And it's the fact that he didn't ask for riches and other things. The truth of the matter was, not only would he give him wisdom, but he would give them the riches and other things as well. All right, we'll stop with that, because I want to take just a moment to do something else. We've reviewed the life of Christ in detail almost every time, but I want to do something else. We have not gone through the whole Bible story insofar as the 17 periods are concerned. We're not going to belabor it, but let's go back through it real quick. The creation stories, then the what? Flood, and then scattering of the people, then 12 through 50 of Genesis, the patriarchs, then following they're in Egypt and the Exodus. All right, well, they leave Egypt, and then they come to Kadesh Barnea. Then we have wilderness wandering, and that lasts for 40 years. And then they come to the plains of Moab. Moses gives his speeches, he dies, and then Joshua leads them in, and they invade the land, conquer the land, and divide it. All right. After Joshua dies, there was a time that they were faithful, but the period of the judges and the 5 cycles we want to remember, because this happens. This even happens in churches. You've got the idea that they began to serve idols, because they really didn't drive out those people. Serve idols, and then God sends an oppressor, and then they cry out for deliverance, and then God sends a judge to help them, and then there's a period of peace. All right, so that goes from Othniel, after the death of Joshua, Othniel, all the way through the book of Judges, and then the next book after Judges, Ruth, and then the first 7 chapters, Sister Janet, of 1 Samuel. And Samuel deals with the last 2 judges, who were Eli and Samuel. All right, so we have the invasion and conquest of the land, then the judges, and then where we, in our readings, give us a king. So we have the united kingdom, followed by the divided kingdom. All right, then after the divided kingdom, during the time of the divided kingdom, you have Assyria taking the northern kingdom, so that leaves Judah alone. And then finally, Judah is taken over by Nebuchadnezzar, and so you have the 70 years of captivity. And then after that, the return with Ezra and Nehemiah. And then after the return, then what do we have? Years of silence, okay? And then after the years of silence, where we are now, life of Christ. Jesus commissions the apostles to go preach his gospel. So then you have the record of the early church, and then during some of that time, there were epistles written back, letters to Christians. Okay, all right. We hadn't gone over that in a while, have we? We don't want it to become, we don't want the Bible story to become rusty. We want to have it where we go right through. All right, we're on, as I told Jonathan. Jonathan, you can hear me, can't you? Okay. All right, we're wanting to just really come down to where we are. Jesus, we have the years of preparation, and then the early ministry, and then John is in prison, so he's going north, and he's up in Galilee for so many things. And we've come down here now to this busy day in Jesus' life. At least 6 things are mentioned. He was accused of casting out demons. The scribes and Pharisees asked for a sign. Jesus' mother and brethren desired to see him. And then the parables. And there are, best we tell, about 8 of them. Some say 10. They include some things that I'm not certain about. And then a little later, Jesus will explain the cost of discipleship. And right before he gets in the boat, Lord, why don't you let me get? The foxes have holes, the birds of the heavens have nests, but the Son of Man has not where to lay his hand. And so if you follow me, there's going to be difficulties. So then as he goes across the Sea of Galilee, he calms the storm. In fact, he falls asleep. And they come to him and try to, can't you just say, Master, wake up. Carest thou not that we perish? And, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And then they were astounded at that. And then he cast out, when they come to the other side, the Gerasene demoniacs, are 2 men there in whom there were demons, and he cast them out. But we're in the parables here, and you tell me. Let's see how we can do together. Let's name them here. First, Jesus said spoke in parables. Somebody went out and did something. A sower went out to sow. How many soils? 4. What are they? Wayside, stony, thorny, and good. All right. And out of all those 4, who were represented? The people who were in a right relation with God. The good ground. The second parable. No, not yet. It's not in Matthew. It's in Mark only. He talks about how even in good ground the seed grows of itself. All right. The third, go back to Matthew. Patty, you just named it. The parable of the tares, which indicates that while we're going through life and trying to do right, they're going to be what? All kinds of obstacles, all difficulties. The tares represent that. All right. After that, the fourth one. The mustard seed starts small and grows large. And how does the kingdom grow? That's the 5th one, the parable of the leaven. All right. The 6th one is the parable of where we were Sunday.
Hidden treasure.
The hidden treasure. And the 7th one, parable of the man seeking goodly pearls. Good. All right. And then the 8th one is, we'll cover it hopefully tonight, parable of the dragnet. Right. Okay. So here's where we are. We were talking about the hidden treasure, and both the treasure hidden in a field, as well as the pearl of great price, a merchant seeking the great pearl, both emphasize the great what? The great value of the kingdom. And we talked about that at some length Sunday morning, finding the kingdom, what all that represents. I did have one other thing I wanted to add. No, not on that. So here, the hidden treasure is the idea of you just by accident or by providence, you come to find it. Bible examples include the Samaritan woman in John 4, the Philippian jailer, as well as others. All right, and the pearl of great price, he knows what he's looking for. He may have other pearls, but he's looking for something, and he sees this is something unlike anything I've ever had. And the great value, the joy and sacrifice in entering it, finding it after searching diligently. He knows that for which he looks. We've already covered Simeon and Anna, who were looking for the redemption of Israel. They were looking for the consolation. The Ethiopian eunuch was reading from what? Isaiah. Lydia and her fellow women were by the riverside where prayer was wont or customary. And in both parables, the treasure found, and this is something I don't think I had Sunday morning, in both parables, the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price, the pearl that was sought, Jesus implies that whatever a person gives up to come to the kingdom, to enter the kingdom, to remain in the kingdom, will be a cheap price to pay for such a prized possession. They were willing to give what? Everything they had. Everything they had. And I really didn't mention this Sunday morning. When a person has to give up a job to really be faithful in the kingdom, give up a spouse. We've known some who found out that they were not scripturally married and actually divorced their spouse because of that. Move to a different city. You're talking about wholesale changes in a person's life. Is that what Jesus is talking about? Sure it is. If there's something that stands between me and a right relation with God, which is really what the kingdom implies, following God, appreciating His sovereignty, the sovereignty of Jesus, the lordship, the authority of Jesus, if something gets in my way, I'm willing to give it all up and count that cheap for the obtaining of the greatness of the value of the kingdom. That's what He said. I think we sometimes think that the kingdom is a whole lot cheaper than it really is. It's the value of the kingdom, Jesus stresses here, is that we ought to be willing to give whatever it takes. He'd give up everything. All right. Comment, question? Anybody? The Lord, all of these commendable statements. David said in Psalm 119, with my whole heart have I what? Have I sought thee? Oh, let me not wander from thy commandment. Whole heart. When Philip was preaching to the Ethiopian and they came to a certain water, he said, if you believe with your whole heart. The Lord doesn't want half-hearted disciples. He wants wholehearted devotion. And people are at various levels. I understand that. But the ones that we have confidence who are in a right relation with God are those who have given God their whole hearts. And we want to do that. All right. Now, the next one is the parable of the fish net. Let's read it first. Farron, you have it in Matthew 13 and the 47 through 50, please. Matthew 13, 47 through 50. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What was that?
I'm almost there.
Okay, Matthew 13, 47 through 50, right.
Again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. That's 44. You said 47.
Right.
Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which, when it was full, they drew to shore, and they sat down and gathered the good into vessels and threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age, the angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth.
All right, so let's follow the line of reasoning that the Lord has used. We have the different reactions to the gospel being preached, the sower. And then the good seed, how it reacts here in the soil, the seed growing of itself. But then the tares, and then the slow, or the starting small, growing mustard. The leaven, the importance of it, the value with the merchant seeking goodly pearls. And then the pearl of great price. And now he pictures the fact that as we are going through our Christian journey, our life, that there are going to be people who claim to be Christians. And are they really? Not really. And sometimes we might not know. We suspect some things, but we might not be sure. Eventually, what's going to happen? Yeah, are they going to dupe everybody and dupe God also? No. What's that? Exactly right. And he pictures it as a dragnet. And that's an interesting, some translations just say the word net. The American Standard has net and dragnet. In the footnote, the net or dragnet is sagani. And we get our English word seine. How many of you have seine fish? How do you do that, Brother Larry?
Or you throw the net out, and when you bring it back in, it fills up, so it seals up on the bottom.
Yeah.
And you bring it back up, the fish are caught in the net, but you get everything that falls in the net.
Exactly. Usually it's close to the shore, isn't it? Or shoals. It's used in catching to swim toward the shoals. That's seine fishing, and our English word comes, it's kind of an abridgment of this Greek word. McGarvey had a neat comment I wanted to share with you. He said, like the parable of the tares, this one indicates the continuance of the mixture of bad and good and points to the final separation. The contents of a net cannot be sorted while it's being drawn. The tares indicate such evils as can be seen and as tempt us to uproot them. The net, the dragnet, shows that in the dark and turbulent waters and in the hurry-scurry of its teeming life, there are things which cannot be seen. The judgment shall be with care, as when men in the broad light of day on the quiet beach sit down to sort the fish. If the parable of the tares emphasizes the waiting, the parable of the net emphasizes the careful sorting. I thought that was extremely good. So I have some other ideas that I wanted to put with this that are not in the notes. Christians, and I believe especially younger, though not limited to younger, it can be older as well, who are in the faith, who are trying to do right, can become discouraged when they learn of sins committed by others who claim to be Christians, whom they thought were faithful. However, Jesus' parables picture obstacles that Christians have to face in as well as out of the church. The tares, I think, primarily deal with out of the church. And this parable, the net, indicates that there can actually be people who don't do what's right within the church. From the parables, we should gain the perspective that brethren can and will disappoint us. Yet, we can persevere. We know they can, because the picture of the judgment of the net, he separates, and they're good fish, aren't there? As well as the ones that, and so here he pictures both. And so there are good along with the evil. So we can persevere. Don't let such people cause us to leave the Lord. And I believe Paul's statement in 1 Timothy 5, the last couple verses of the chapter, reflects this very idea of some in churches whose sins are unknown. Sometimes they become somewhat known, but eventually will be made known. Jesus will carefully sort all this out in judgment. Let's turn to 1 Timothy 5. And whoever has those as you're turning 1 Timothy 5, there are two major ideas. You've got widows and widows indeed, whom the church can help. And then the last part of 1 Timothy 5 deals with elders and prospective elders. He talks about elders who rule well and be counted worthy of double honor in 17:18. And then how they have some extra protection, verse 19, against an elder receive not an accusation except the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And yet when they sin, they're to be reproved like anybody else in verse 20. And then verse 21, he says, now you, Timothy, make sure you treat everyone without prejudice, without partiality. And then be careful when you are going to appoint men as elders. Lay hands hastily on no man. But somebody else read it. Kirsten, if you would, 22 through 24. Or 25, I'm sorry. 22 through the end.
Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and with frequent ailments. The sins of some people are conspicuous, going before them to judgment. The sins of
All right, thank you. So be careful. Don't rashly appoint somebody that you've not checked out carefully and may have some sins that need to be taken care of. And verse 23 almost seems like it's be no longer a drinker of water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake, and often infirmities could be due to the fact that you need to be extremely careful. And perhaps Timothy had some stomach ailments dealing with some of these issues that he discusses. But in 24 and 25, which was the point I wanted to make, some men's sins are evident. That is, you see them, they're manifest, they're out front, going before into judgment. Some men also, they follow after. What did your translation say, that phrase there, Kirsten? Verse 24. Some men's sins are conspicuous, yes. And then what's the second part of that? Some are what? Appear later. Yeah, might not know them exactly right. And then the same is said of good works in verse 25. In like manner, there are good works that are evident, that might be known. And then sometimes people do good that nobody knows about in this life, but the Lord does, and He will make known that in judgment. And so you've got good and bad. And Timothy is warned, just make sure that you don't appoint or lay hands hastily on, don't do it rashly or rapidly. And so take up, because there are some people whose sins are evident. Some are not so evident. They may be hidden. It's just like good. Sometimes you see all the good, sometimes you don't. The good will be coming. And so that's the point I tried to make in relation to the fish net, that Paul's statement reflects this very idea that some in churches whose sins are unknown, but eventually will be made known, and Jesus will sort it all out. Both the parable of the tares, as well as the parable of the fish net, indicate that evil people will be in the world, and some in the church, until judgment. And there are at least two implications here that I wanted to share with you for a moment. Such implies, first of all, that both good and bad people will inhabit the earth until the last day, when the earth and its works shall be burned up. Climate change, global warming, alarmists sometimes predict that greenhouse gases, because of the use of fossil fuels, will cause all life to be extinct in 8-10 years. These parables, this is just one instance in the Bible that denies that. Furthermore, I'm reminded in Acts, the 17th chapter, that God has appointed a day in which He will what? Judge the world in righteousness. So it's not up to puny man that we can have so much, it's an egotism really, but that denies that. A second thing that's implied is that there will not be 1,000 years between the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the wicked. The separation occurs all at what? At one time, in judgment. And so this parable, as well as the parable of the tares, both parables teach really the same thing, that the separation will be made at judgment. There won't be the wicked, the righteous will be raised, and then 1,000 years later the wicked will be raised. That's just not in the Bible. Not in the Bible at all. Okay, any comment or question on any of this? Yes, sir, Josh.
So as far as differentiating as far as tares go, we just don't have to realize that there's some people, this isn't just merely about a Christian slipping up and being a discouragement to others, but he struggles, he's weak. Well, I certainly put myself in that category. But, we were talking about the tares, what the Bible's talking about is just truly evil people that have totally rejected and are working contrary to the gospel of Christ. How are we to feel about those people? Stay away from them, they're evil, or are we to pray for them and hope that they will?
Yeah, I think the latter. It just depends on, I think, who they are. The tares, I think, represents more of ungodly people, but they could be, some in the point he makes is that the sower of the seed, the good seed, is Jesus, and the wheat would represent sons of the kingdom, or disciples. Whereas the devil is the sower of the tares, and the tares would represent evil people. And then the field in which both the wheat as well as the tares are sown, the field, he says, is the world. And that doesn't mean worldliness, it means everybody. And so you've got all, and then the reapers are angels, and so then when he concludes it or explains it, he says that the reapers will take out of the field those that, so there's separation. I think, Josh, to answer your question, it's just all evil and good in the tares. But in the fish net, he's primarily dealing with the kingdom. The tares represent, seems to me, as we kind of already said, obstacles that Christians have to face primarily from the world. Whereas the net represents sometimes evil people who will be among Christians that we just, we don't, it's not like you're forgetting about withdrawing from the disorderly. That's not the point. He just makes the point, I think, that you can have people who deceive you in the church. I think that's the idea here. And even if the Lord hadn't said it, we know it by experience, don't we? That there can be people who are baptized and they claim to be Christians, and they disappoint us tremendously.
There's people that live moral lives but reject Christ.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly
So they
right.
would be considered that as well.
Well, people who reject Jesus wouldn't be in the kingdom. And these when he says the kingdom of heaven is like unto a dragnet, then you've got to, I think, reason from that he's speaking of people who have been saved from their sins, but then they're turned. Let me reread it here. And again, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was filled, they drew up on the beach and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but the bad they cast away. So it's not that we're tolerating and putting up with sin in the church, but I think the idea is that, and McGarvey, I thought, had such a tremendous explanation that, here it is underwater. You can't always see what is good and bad when it's underwater and hidden until you drag it on out. Then you make and so sometimes we can't know all the details of it. There have been people that found out they were gambling. You spent thousands of dollars gambling and nobody knew it until later on. Adultery, the same way.
Some people you may not ever know.
Might not ever, just like Paul said in 1 Timothy 5. Yeah. So, some their sins are evident, some go on into judgment before people know. But I think, I tell you what it does, it gives us confidence that when we're trying to do what's right and then someone lets us down, they disappoint us, that they're not behaving like they ought, don't say, well, I thought people in the church were perfect. They're people out in the New Testament order. They're following Jesus. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. But what we're supposed to do, does that mean we always do it? No. We have the ideal. We have the standard. We have the Jesus as our mentor, our perfect pattern. And we encourage that. We teach on that. But then when it comes to the practicality of it, not everybody's doing it. And so we take people on face value. We accept what they say as truth until proved otherwise, or the track record proves otherwise. But we got to know that this happens, and I think that Jesus gives us this perspective. It's a divine perspective, really.
That's the thing that the most you have to realize: if you do something, if you sin, what the consequence is going to be, not just in the end judgment, but just like when David sinned. Counting, some had to tell him he was doing wrong. Mm-hmm. And instead of just choosing, I'll have my enemies chase after me, that way nobody else really will suffer. I guess if he made that choice, that would have been something directly affected him. But instead he kind of chickened out, so to speak. 70,000 of his subjects to die, that had to been afterwards, that had been his subjects, look at him in a kind of a bad light, plus he had to live with the heckness that he cost 70,000 people their life.
Yeah,
You know, there's that too.
yeah. Well,
And some of those 70,000 may have not been, or probably were not saved, and they would have had their fates sealed
Mhm.
in judgment.
yeah. All right, anybody else? Gene, anything? Anyone? All right. The parables, again, help us. They give us a perspective about what to expect. All right, so here we go with the next one is the householder. And some put it as a parable. I'm not one of them, though it could be, possibly not a parable except in comparison of a disciple to a scribe. Let's read that, Sister Sandra, if you would, 51 through 53 of Matthew 13.
Jesus said unto them, Have ye understood all these things? They say unto him, Yea, Lord. Then said he unto them, Therefore every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is a householder, which bringeth forth out of his treasury things new and old.
And 53.
And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed thence.
All right, so the last parables that we have recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke in this section is ended with the householder. And now, just glance once more. Jesus says, do you understand what I've been saying to you? And they say, what? Yes, we do. And so he then takes their answer and he says, every scribe who has been made a disciple or who has become a disciple of the kingdom or to the kingdom is like a man who brings forth treasure new and old. He's like a scribe that has been made a disciple of the kingdom. A scribe. A scribe was what among the Jews, primarily?
One who wrote down
He wrote-
the words of the law.
That's right. He wrote down the law.
He was a scholar.
What was it? He's a scholar. He'd be a teacher. And so he says, now everyone who, he says, every scribe who has been made a disciple. So you got disciples now who basically can become like scribes of the Old Testament. Every scribe who has been made a disciple to the kingdom of heaven, or the New American Standard said, has become a disciple of the kingdom. McGarvey said, not every Jewish scribe, but every disciple possessed of the information and powers of thought which would enable him to rank as the Jewish scribes did. And Brother Bowles mentioned this that I thought was good. The one who has his heart filled with the knowledge of the truth, or one who lets the word of Christ dwell in him richly, is like this householder. His stores of treasured truth, his illustrations of it, should be so full that in any emergency he can bring forth things new and old with wise adaptation to the ever-varying need of his household. Things new and old, that the word new there is the Greek word kainos instead of neos. Kainos means different in new in kind or different, versus neos means new relative to age. So he says, basically, you've got all different kinds of things that you've experienced that you can, so to speak, bring to the table with this new information you're learning through the parables and through the gospel. So that helps us. And I think all of us here appreciate that you know, in our past lives before we became Christians, we used that and we can show how the gospel affects ourselves and go from there. You bring things new as well as old to the table, so to speak, and helping people to see that. I think that's what Jesus was saying here. Comment, question, anybody? Okay, so here's where we've been. The sower and the good seed is we see grows by itself. How it grows, we don't know. Then the kingdom parables begin. And then the tares, the obstacles, the mustard seed starts small but grows large. It continues to spread by by contact, by permeating each individual's heart. And then the great value can be seen sometimes by accident or providence, sometimes by searching for it diligently, and yet recognize we're going to have people who are not what they seem to be with us, but God will separate it in judgment. And then teachers in the kingdom, all of us here present tonight, should be able to use things old and new in taking this information and helping others as well. I wanted to say something real quickly about this. When we go back to the purpose of parables, Lord, why do you speak to them in parables? He said, unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom, but unto them it's not. It's mentioned in Mark and Luke. Multitudes were following Jesus, but as noted in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus called on those disciples to believe and to follow his teaching. Not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who doeth the will of my Father who is in heaven. Not all people desire. Further, opposition and hostility against Jesus were growing, especially among the Pharisees. So Jesus' use of parables, as it were, hid the deeper truths from those who were not sincerely seeking him, and he confused them. Brother Waldron, Sister Waldron made that point. Confounded and confused them, while at the same time they gave greater insight into the nature of the kingdom to those who were sincere disciples. Y'all can quote that. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and ye shall knock and it shall be open to you. And in John 7:17, if any man willeth to do his will, he shall know the teaching. And some Bible students believe that Jesus' use of parables and the confusion it caused among non-disciples, such as the Pharisees, slowed their opposition and put everything on the divine timetable that they wanted. And we got this at the end also of our work. Jesus' preaching of the parables proves at least his deity from at least two perspectives. One is he himself is the subject of prophecy, in that it was prophesied that the Messiah would teach using this method from Psalm 78. And then the parables themselves contain predictions relative to the growth of the kingdom. How it would, the parable of the sower, and so on. All of which, except the two concerning judgment, continue in progress from Pentecost. No man could be so accurate and insightful except he were God with us, Emmanuel. So here's where we've been and where we're going next. Sunday morning will be Jesus explains the cost of discipleship. It's about 6 till. Real quickly, we answered on page 70. Real quick, on page 70, Parable of the Fish Net. Basic teaching of this is that the kingdom of heaven can contain both what and what? That's right. While some wicked people may claim membership in churches belonging to the Lord, what eventually will happen? There'll be a what? Separation. Then the parables are understood. Jesus asked his disciples if they understood, and had they? Yes. What does the kingdom scribe bring forth from his treasure? Things new and old. Right. The point of emphasis seems to be the one who treasures the word of Christ as a storehouse from which he may draw lessons for every need. One who teaches in the kingdom can use things he knew before he became a Christian as well as things he learned afterwards. And then we have the summary of the parables down below that we've already gone over. The older I get, guys, the more I'm convinced that the study of Jesus, this study of the Bible overall, but especially what we're doing, gives us such a perspective that we're usually not caught flat-footed when we hear about things going on among people or how people react to the truth. In other words, you get to the point where nothing surprises you much. And because you've got God's divine revelation on the matter. Any other comments or questions?